today, very, very excited to have Ari Melenciano. Ari is a artist and technologist and researcher. But before I get into introducing Ari, um, I want to show my T-shirt, Afrotectopia.
I love it.
So I met Ari at Afrotectopia, where I was invited to speak to talk about some of my work. I can't even remember what year this was, but Afrotectopia is this social institution at the intersection of art, design, technology, and Black culture and activism. And it sort of cultivates this radical Black imaginary through an annual festival, and there have been several of them. So, and it was amazing. And when I first met Ari, I was like, wow, really need to follow Ari's work. So Ari is an artist, a technologist, researcher, and a cultural theorist. Her art and research practice explores societal, subconscious intellect, computational anthropology, ethnographical morphing of artistic and psychological expressions across the diaspora. Um, and this is through the formation and embodiment of myths and rituals, and the materialization of polymathic research. I hope I did that well. But I'm just going to shut up now because there's just too much to say about Ari. I'm going to hand it over to Ari. And wait, before I do that, sorry, I have to remind you all, this is being recorded, right? Please, if you're not speaking, put your mics on mute. We'll have a question and answer at the end where you would either raise your hand digitally or type in the chat. And if there are any issues, you could privately DM me. So now I give it over to Ari. Thank you, Ari, so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Hello all. Sorry, I'm adding just one slide to my deck. So a little multitasking, but okay, time to share. Very excited to join you all. I remember the last time I joined this program was at a graduation with you, IO too, which was really nice to share some things that I've learned and celebrate you all's big milestone. So let's share the screen. Okay. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to do, apologize in advance for one, I'm going to talk very fast. I have a lot of slides, but I'm just going to kind of breeze through them and give the story of really the ways that I've been thinking and also the different moments that have shifted the way that I've thought and how all of them have fed into each other. So it's a lot of different topics that are going to be shared, but hopefully you see the thread that goes through. So something I've been fascinated about as of late has been this idea of sculpting consciousness. And I think for me, it's really important to find ways to live as intentional and aligned to who I am as possible. And so all these different forms of research have kind of led to this idea of what is consciousness, and let me explore how to create a consciousness that allows me to live in the world the way that I would like to. So again, this is kind of like a timeline of the ways that I've been thinking, and just show all these ideas that have popped into my head and how they've influenced each other. So for one, I think generally throughout my life, a big thing has been studying how we see and experience the world. And I have three different images here. One is a photograph that I took with the film camera. Another is a photograph that I created with AI. And another is a photograph of a painting that I've created that is a synthesis of a lot of these different things. And I'll get to what that photograph is, but it's a character inside of this world that I'm building. So first, to start off with the photograph, I realized the way that I've traditionally, as someone that has grown up as an artist, and photography being one of my favorite mediums because it allows me to very directly and quickly capture the world the way that I want to. The way that I've seen the world through photography is very much a framing. How do I want to frame this reality? What do I want to include and not include? What angle do I want to take this image at so I can sort of romanticize the mundane? Like all this is just me in my car looking up out of my window and seeing the train tracks. It's like, usually this is not a pretty sight. This is in Bed-Stuy. And when you have those like railroad tracks in the middle of a big street, it doesn't look very pleasant, but just the fact that like to be able to frame it in this way and turn it into something that feels artful and look at, you know, the design of it. I think for me, it's very much how to find beauty in the everyday thing. And so photography has been my way of framing this reality. And what I realized is, as an artist, and I've had so many shifts in my life already of being an artist, growing up in this world as someone that really wants to create with whatever is around me. Ayo and I were just talking about how we are often told you have to stay in this boundary and create in this medium and et cetera, et cetera. And for me, I've been someone that has always tried to silence the external noise and really figure out what aligns with me and how do I want to operate in this world. And after going to grad school for technology, entering the tech world as a technologist, but also as an artist, and then having to take a step back and realize, is this really how I want to live in this world? And like I could continue going in this career, or I could actually, if I feel all these feelings inside of me, if something isn't right, then I need to make a drastic change. And so I did make a drastic shift of leaving that entire career and putting everything on pause and trying to figure out, who am I, what am I doing in this world, and how do I live the way that I know I should be living and I'm not living right now. And so that's what I took really this past year to do, of study that. What am I doing and how do I figure out who I am? And as I've done that, I've had different frameworks that have been revealed to me. Of these are me studying the way that I operate as a creative, a human, and as an artist. And how to, for me, it's really important to create frameworks so that I can return to them and have a level of awareness in the way that I move so that I can operate differently if I see it doesn't work, or transcend it if I want to move past it. So there's this one framework that I've shared with students called ants, bees, and trees. And I'm going to breeze past this because I have so many other things I want to talk about. But I see ants as, I have this book on the spiritual meanings of different symbols. And this book talks about how ants have always been this sort of symbol of psychological and spiritual activity. Like the art is the ant, the artist is the ant, and they are working in this way that unveils their psychological and spiritual activity. Tiny ants embody the methodical, discriminating work that helps our psyche, soul, sorts out the relationship to the divine. So all this micro work that we do as a human, and I think about this in an analogy to the way that we move through this world throughout our lives. Like we start off as this child in our hometown, and we are very influenced by our parents, our friends, our family, our surroundings. Like that's our world. We're these ants. So ants for me represent this small community, multitude, labor, the micro, and they work together to achieve a large task. So you are an ant in your society, and you all are working together, whether you're realizing it or not, to make sure that the society that you are embedded in is working properly. Then there are the bees. And so this is the shift where you leave your hometown. This is probably more of like the college era of your life, where you leave one space and go to another, and now you're being influenced by a whole bunch of things. And this book defines bees as, to the ancient Egyptians, the honeybee was the creature that transformed the warmth of the sun's rays into golden sweetness. So this form of alchemy. And then there's also this practice of a mere pound of honey requires 25,000 trips between flower and hive, and contains the essence of over 2 million flowers. So there's a synthesis. So I see the way that we move from being ants to then being bees in our lifetime, of leaving one place that we were so influenced by to now being influenced by a whole bunch of different things, and how we are using the things that we understand, synthesizing what our professors and friends are saying, and the people on the street are, how they're dressing and talking, and synthesizing all that to then eventually create this sort of tree. And I see the tree as a milestone within our lives, where we move from the stage of being this baby, child, teenager in our hometown to this bee, this little adult that's emerging and looking at other worlds, to a tree where, as this book describes, a tree of a sort of nestle, a space of where creatures can nestle within. They find shelter in trees. And how a tree is a symbol of something that was once so small, a tiny seed, and now it's this huge ecosystem of all these creatures that live inside of it. And I see this tree as a moment where we finally reach a form of adulthood, but this can happen even in childhood, where we have this idea and it goes through so many filters as we synthesize all these different ideas, and then we actually create something that exists forever. Like we may create an art piece and maybe a drawing, and it may be destroyed in some event, but it's that creation that will always exist. And if you create an art piece that exists in the world, like a public sculpture, that now becomes a home for other people. It's a symbol of something. Maybe someone had then experiences a memory in your tree, and now they will always associate your tree with that feeling. Or you create something and now it's a symbol of something you've experienced, and it'll always be a symbol of that experience. So for me, trees are really important to think about, of like these different stages of how we move between these different cycles, and to flush this out in a flow diagram of really us being this small creature, but understanding, and it's like an analogy of a lot of things. It's us as in a lifetime, it's us in the practice of being an artist, of you do a daily task, you're working on a huge project, but you do little things bit by bit. And in a day, you might not feel satisfied with the work that you did, but it's brick by brick. And eventually you realize you've gotten to that tree. It's that hybrid mentality of understanding that all artists are influenced by something, and you're bringing all these things together, and it's a sort of alchemy of all these influences into something new. And I really developed this while I was in the tech space very heavily, like as a full-time job, and seeing the way that we were using generative AI tools, and seeing all this sort of seeing all this like dissonance between traditional artists and now tech artists, and or artists that generally are interested in exploring AI, and how there's this ego of like tension within it, where people that are traditional artists that have not used AI, that feel weird about it, when you see it through this framework of understanding, oh, AI is really just doing exactly what a human is doing. It's just on a computational and a macro level. And if you're going to have a problem with it, it's really all these other problems, the economic problem of all these companies making money off artists' labor. But the creative part of AI, I think, is really reflective of the human part of creativity, and kind of just like to look at that scope. And so another thing that I also started to reflect on is how when we use these different tools, it's really about what is synthesized through you. And with this framework that I've been exploring, when you understand yourself as an ant who eventually becomes a bee and eventually creates these trees, all the trees that are created outside of you are, they have a sort of energy that exists within them. They radiate in a world in a special way because of all the special things that are inside of you. And so it's as you hone in on your craft and learn who you are as an artist, your signature starts to develop, and people can identify the things that come out of you based on your energy. And I think this is something that people are still trying to figure out in the tech art kind of space, because it's so easy to create really beautiful work, but it's hard to know who created it. And so I think also in these moments where we are using different tools that kind of hide our input and hide our artistic integrity in the beginning, because it's people are still kind of playing around with it. I think the moments where it's revealing your style is what allows an artist to kind of move through any medium. It doesn't matter the medium, and anyone can recognize what they're doing, recognize that it's coming from them, because it's the energy, which takes a lot of time to hone in onto. And so I realized I needed to use this framework on my own work. And so I'm just going to give, maybe I'll just give this one example or two examples, because I want to get to the other slides. But this one, I was thinking, okay, well, how do the ants, bees, and trees work within my own practice? And this is me exploring this idea of kind of recontextualizing labor for artistic imaginings. And what I mean by this is recontextualizing labor of what is labor? Why are we all in the Zoom room not getting paid for exchanging intelligence, but people that are creating this technology are getting paid, or people that are, like, not, I wish I had better examples, but why do some things get paid and other things don't get paid for? And it's a recognition of the value that comes out of these different activities, but what is creating these value systems? And so I think about things like someone cleaning a bathroom and that being something that you get paid for, but having a dinner party and exchanging ideas and love and care with your friends is not something that gets paid for, but it is a contribution to society, because the energy that existed within that dinner party is going to reverberate and impact society in hopefully a positive way. So there's that part of it, but then there's also this temporal nature in the way that we live in the world, and temporal as in we move through the world and there's no trace of our existence unless we decide we want to create something that symbolizes that permanence. So if we were to have a dinner party, for me, I imagine, what if I laid out a whole canvas in my dining room and I put paint on everybody's feet and said, okay, let's have a dinner party. And then by the end of it, I have this canvas with a bunch of footprints, but it's an art piece because it represents this moment that we all shared. And there's a permanence to it because paint was attached to our movement. And so I'm thinking about both of these things at the same time as I'm up on my roof and creating this canvas that is me buying supplies from Home Depot, cleaning supplies, and me thinking about even just the lineage within my family of having my grandmother being someone that has worked inside of industries where she is someone that's cleaning or hospitality. And so I think about things like that of me generations after, where I'm designing a life as an artist, and the privileges of that, but also how I can use all these understandings, again, like this B kind of framework of what does it mean for me to do this, and how can I like kind of question the factors in society that allow me to do this and forced her to do that, or made her, like how is society being designed? So there's one. There's also, and the ants would be labor, exploring labor. There's also, sometimes you have subconscious ants, and I also slash it with shoulders, because ants I also see as sometimes you can be inspired by people and they can become your shoulders. You are now standing on their shoulders and using the things that they've done into your own work. And though I wasn't directly thinking about Sam Gilliam, it's interesting how oftentimes I share this work and people, if they know his work, they often say, oh, it looks like Sam Gilliam, because Sam Gilliam creates these large canvases dipped in different paints and hues, and a very abstract expressionist kind of work. And so, though I wasn't thinking about Sam, sometimes our shoulders are our subconscious shoulders. And so being inspired by that work. And then the tree becomes this abstract painting that is representing all these things that I've shared with you, but no one would know that just by looking at it. And maybe they have other memories that they would embed into the work that I've created. And then also sometimes it's very directly placing yourself in as much of a shoe as you can of another artist that you admire. Like Matisse is someone that I really appreciate the sentiment and the ethos within his work. And so even though I'm not like, and I also just enjoy the fact that I'm so different from him phenotypically, racially, gender, age, like parts of the world that we grew up in, like in every way, I'm completely different, but I'm exploring what it might feel like to do the things that he has done, and what happens when I do it, and what energy is coming out of me when I do it. And sometimes it might just be recreating a photo that he has done and like kind of just like playing around and existing as if it's him. And other times it could be recreating exactly what a method that he has used, and me saying, okay, well, what happens when I do that? And this is towards the end of Matisse's life. He was really interested in paper cutouts. And so he would limit himself to scissors, paper, and glue, and create these large bodies of work. And so for me, I've been really interested in that too. And I think for me, I also appreciate limitation. I think limitation allows for creativity to be exponentially greater, because you're not thinking about so many different things, and instead you're confining the possibilities of all the things that you could potentially explore, so that you can get deeper into the possibilities of the tools that you have. And so that's what I was doing with this. It's an infinite amount of forms and shapes that I could create by using paper and glue. So I'm going to skip way ahead, and because we have a few minutes left and I want to have this Q&A. But so basically what I've been doing, I had my whole art practice. I was studying the ways that I was as an artist. I was also in the very immersed, and I still am immersed in the tech world, but I'm not working full time in the space anymore. And in this, at the time, right as I was leaving, generative AI was taking off. And generative AI was such a huge shift in the collective understanding of how to create and how to explore the world. And for me, I started, as someone who has always been very critical of the things, of tools, and just like questioning what is happening and what are we using, I was immediately critical of what is going on with this generative AI tool, and understanding the fact that it's using language, and language being so influential to our ways of being and our ways of thinking, but also every other way that we understand the world being rooted in language, and how we're now using a tool that is exactly built off of language and just pairing all other data to language to now create this whole way of creating. And also the fact that we're using a language and a language style that's so Western, but not even just Western, it's also very American, or very rooted in American values. And also thinking about being in big tech and looking around and seeing the people that are actually building the technologies, and knowing that even though this demographic might look like it's somewhat diverse, it's actually way less diverse than that. So it's really understanding that the tools that we're now using when we do generative AI are very much replication of a value system of a really small group of people. And so I think this is the value system that we all are so heavily immersed in, and we don't really have alternatives to that value system. And so it's been really important and impactful to me to study other value systems. And this is a value system that Marimba Ani shares in her book, Yurugu, which talks about different forms of logic. And I think this was so inspiring for me to just see, because I had never thought about logic outside of the way that we all understand logic. And so to see that their logic is actually really just this subjective thing. The way that we rationalize things is very much an influence on society that's around us. And even things like here, where she creates equations on the left of what is a knower. A knower is a thinking being minus a spiritual being, and the society in which we live within very much removes the power of spirituality and the power of emotion, and being void of all of those things allows you to be someone that is thought of as objective, when really there is no such thing as objective, because objectivity is all understood through someone's perception, and everyone's perception is different. So I think just to like the work that she did in understanding Plato's legacy and Plato creating the academy, and which then created all of her ideas on logic, has been amazing. And it allowed me to have tools to return to these forms of AI and study what is actually doing. And so I began my explorations in AI, as using it as a sort of tool to study society, and creating this area of research that I've called computational anthropology. I'm studying the ways of the world, but through computational methods, and doing it in a way where I might upload an image of myself like here, and then all I'm doing is prompting with single words, adjectives that either are true to me or not true to me, and see how it understands language, this it being the large body of data that is being used inside of these machine learning algorithms to create other content. See what are all the information that it has around the word Nigerian to represent me in the way that it has, because I use Nigerian on top of my image, or Puerto Rican or Dominican, which I am, but the fact that it changes me completely, or calm versus poor or aunt or artist, all the ways that it just changes my phenotypical nature based off the associations of the word. And I did it here too. And the most jarring being obviously programmer, bottom left, of it changing my race and my gender, because it only has seen it, the stereotype of an image of a programmer has been a white, olderish kind of and frazzled looking kind of male. And even though I'm a programmer too, so it's not, for me, I saw it as, I think it really revealed the seriousness of not taking any of this seriously, but seeing it as just a reflection of the dominant narrative of society, and how it's only able to grasp what is most commonly communicated to it. Or even blending my identity with different people. And this took me on a whole wormhole of understanding my identity and the way that I perform in this world, and like really becoming aware of that, like how I choose to represent myself, and what does it mean when I blend myself with other people that have chosen to represent themselves very differently, but also to go back to studying the computer, which I use synonymously for AI and society in general. What is it keeping of me, and what is it placing of others? Like Michelle Obama, I'm not smiling with my teeth, but it uses teeth to have a smile for Michelle Obama, because most of the images of Michelle, she's smiling with her teeth, and just the way that it understands us based off how we have fed it most commonly. And so I've written on this. I created an essay called Computational Anthropology, Exploring Identity Through Artificial Synthesis. And I explain all, like, just the reflections that I had a year ago in playing around with this, and what it has meant to me to use this and study myself, also study society. Things I've done are grabbing captions from the public domain of archival images, and using simply the captions and the way that they have captioned the images as a prompt inside of these AI tools, and have it recreate those images purely off that prompt. And this was mind-blowing to me, because this was also in the very early days of these tools being unveiled to the public, and how accurate it could be, or how well it could recreate the essence of the image, but it would miss certain things. Like with the first image on the left, Benjamin Pap is actually I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's the Black appearing male, but when they recreate Benjamin, none of them appear to be Black, but they all have the aesthetic of Benjamin, and the fashion style and the hairstyles. Or this minstrel image, which is the original being what seems like a Black person, also in an exaggerated Black face, but it removes the exaggerated Blackness on any of the other minstrel images, but it retains the aesthetic and the graphic design kind of style. So what it understands and doesn't, but also the societal nuances that are unveiled of when I upload an image of here, like with men on horseback at a wedding in Ethiopia, the fact that when I add context to it and not just give it the caption, but also say things like by African photographer in National Geographic, what I found was when I would say by an African photographer, if it was an image that was taken on the continent of Africa, you would see the subject's faces. But if I said by a white photographer, you would see their backs. And for me, that represented things like voyeurism of when you have people of different communities entering a different community and trying to capture it with the camera. There's not that level of comfort between the photographer and the subject, or even with different platforms like in National Geographic, how it often romanticizes the images. And again, we see this level of voyeurism of you don't see the images of the faces, because usually National Geographic photographers are not really people that are from these places around the world, or in a Red Cross pamphlet, which is much more about charity and donation. So it's not really trying to romanticize an image in the way that National Geographic would. And you see that in the way that it designs the images. So things like that. But I also had a very fun time just creating this artificial world for myself and living this life that I haven't, of just such a high level of extravagance, and flying in my own jet and being a supermodel, having a photo shoot on the side of the Egyptian pyramids. Like, what does this mean? And I think for me to see myself in these different worlds in a way that I'd never seen myself before also very heavily impacted my understanding of myself, the possibilities that I could have in this world. And I think there's so many areas of research that I want to dive in deeper, of studying what happens when people see their selves or likeness in situations they've never been in, and how that impacts their psyche and their understanding of themselves, and their confidence and all sorts of things. But also this bending of identity, where it's not necessarily about glamorizing yourself or romanticizing your life, but also just seeing yourself in very different ways. And I think seeing these images really blew my mind, of really honing in on the fact that, oh, the person that I have been so far has really just been this, me limiting the possibility of all the things that I could be. And I could wear my hair and do all these things if I want to. And it's really just a decision, and understanding that identity is purely this performance. And we can always decide how we want to show up in the world on any given day and change that if we want to. So I'll skip through a lot of these. These are really just me exploring AI, whether I'm creating industrial design through fashion, like with Air Jordans, turning them into a sink faucet, or creating these portraits of like really wildly surreal portraits, to music spreads, speculative music spreads that I could create in a matter of a few minutes by just using ChatGPT to create copy for these speculative music artists, and then creating images that would represent them. Even exploring architecture. What does it mean to blend AI with architecture? Like, I would upload an image of a really mundane kind of setup, like just a practical gym, and then use language to add all these other elements and make it like a completely transformed space. And I think for me, it's really just been about studying, using AI as a tool to understand the way that we think, like cultural metacognition. So the awareness of the practice of thinking, and the understanding these are just different cultures that are embedded into this AI system. And so I'll wrap up with very quickly going through, after doing all those explorations and using AI as a way to study society, I decided it was really important for me to study myself, similar to what I was sharing in the beginning of this slide of who am I as an artist. And I needed to hone in on that and really silence the external world and understand, how is my psyche being designed? How has my psyche been designed so far? And how can I design my psyche to work in the way that I would like it to? And so I created this sort of Atsukazu residency, where it was purely me getting a studio, investing in my practice in a very serious way of getting a studio for myself, and studying, using it as a way to just, explode my practice and kind of find resonance within the chaos. Like, what am I aligned with and what am I not? And I realized the way that we understand our truths completely control our way of being. And I'm trying to say all this stuff so quickly, so I'm thinking fast, but really it was really important to understand what are my truths as a human and an artist, because what I realized in being in the tech space as an artist is it was so hard to get to my flow, because I was constantly having to learn all these different technologies. And when you're constantly learning, you're not just getting into that meditative space as an artist and creating. And that for me is my favorite part of being an artist, is like using whatever I'm creating as a way to just turn my brain off and just create and zone out. And so I wanted to get back to that flow space. And I realized I needed, the way that we enter flow is really just by having these truths. And these truths are also parts of our ego. And what is the role of the ego? And for me as an artist, I had such an existential crisis of my ego and understanding, how am I showing up in this world and what's the purpose of my art when I become more aware of the role that my ego is playing. And so what I did was I silenced the external world so I could really hear myself. And that meant things like getting offline as much as possible, limiting my social interactions, limiting all media that I'm consuming, because all of that is just other people's ways of understanding the world and it's influencing you. And so for me, I had to really shut all that off and just try and listen to myself and meditate a lot and just like study what is going on in my subconscious. And so again, it was like this, the studio time of me studying every part of myself. What are my motives, values, insecurities, natural inclinations? What are threads that are going within my work? And how is my psyche, what cages do I exist within? What cages does my psyche exist within? And we all have cages that our psyche exists within. Some of us think, oh, I could never do that. Who am I to be this bold? Who am I to be this, put all my things out there? Like, who am I to say that I know these kind of things? And I think it's really important to kind of like understand what those cages are so we can transcend them and understand that's just a story that we're telling ourselves. We could tell ourselves a different story to empower our work. And so it was being very intentional about every part of the way that I exist in my life, from my home design to the food that I'm eating to the things that I'm listening to, understanding all of that is impacting me as an artist, and being okay with the whole process. And I think we're often taught that we need to have a very clear start and end with the things that we're creating. And me saying, oh, messiness is actually a great thing. Chaos is actually a great thing because I can find the things that are falling in my lap that feel very aligned with who I am, and I can use that. And in order, if I want to do collaboration in the future, I really need to understand who I am, which means I need to be very, very much in solitude so I can recognize the contributions that I would give to any collaboration and value that. So all of these different things, I'm just exploring myself and looking at all the things that I've created and finding the threads. Like this is something I probably tossed out a bunch of times of, oh, I love to make music with plant data, which is a form of biosonification, but how does that exist in the music industry? And how does that exist within my art practice? All right, I'm gonna put that to the side, I'm gonna do other things. And instead it's me revisiting, oh, these are things that I've been interested in for years. Let's actually take more care of those things. And that's a challenge for all of us as creatives of what are those things that you think are normal to you and things that you think are just casual explorations, but they actually are very significant to your way of being, your ontology, your artistic ontology. And so to hone in on those things and find the patterns are really important. And so studying my own philosophies and belief systems and rituals and all of this just to get this form of flow. And I realized once I have these forms of truth, and I say truth as really just this reflection of anything that you decide to believe is true, that's a truth. And so once you have these truths, it allows for a level of confidence where you can release the cognitive load of trying to figure out. So truth of, is this style of painting valid? Is it good enough? Whatever it is, but that you're questioning when you're creating, once you accept, yeah, this is my style, I'm going to be confident in it and I'm not going to stop, and I'm going to stop thinking about it. You release all of that and now you can minimize your thinking, maximize your doing, and that gets to flow. And that was really the whole objective of this residency is, how do I understand myself such a point that I can have such confidence and value the things that I'm creating so well that I can put it out into the world. And really it's about, by the end of this whole practice, what I was able to do is redesign my relationship to my ego, from art to ego. And before I always saw the ego as a stage for the artist. And I think we're often taught that, like, how can we use our ego to assert our individualism and show how great we are? But I think often that requires you to perform, and it can be crippling because you're trying to mimic the way that the art world is telling you how to be. And it's not actually natural. It's more synthetic because it's really influenced by all these other factors, as opposed to seeing the ego as a vehicle. And when you see it as a vehicle, you're using the ways that you understand yourself and the power of the inner world that you have within you, the spirit, the subconscious, and you're just using your physical body, your vessel, as a way to tap into that spirit that you have and the subconscious that you have and bring it out into the world. So that's the vehicle. Your vessel now becomes a vehicle. Your vessel is no longer this object for people to look at and admire with the things that you're creating, but instead it's just a practice of valuing what you have inside of you and releasing it into the world. And so to bring all of that to a close, what that then became as I studied myself and understood all the different phenomena that have existed within my life, whether it's relationships that I've had with different people and how they worked out and what happened within them, or different traits of my psyche and the way that I think, what I did was translate all of those different things into symbols similar to with the ants, bees, and trees. Like, it's great to have just like symbols that have so much context within them. And my symbols became people, and they became people that were parts of a myth that I'm building, this whole world now that I get to exist within. And it's my truth. This is me understanding who I am and creating a whole foundational framework for the way that I exist as an artist and a researcher and all these other things, so that I'm not constantly trying to figure out what am I supposed to be doing. Instead, I can just tap back into my myth and study the different characters that I have. And now I have ways to bring them together. So in this myth, I have a character like Azuli, who's the beginning of this whole story. And Azuli is reflective of emotions, intuition, and nurture. And I also like to use zodiac signs because they're also a myth, and they're also symbols of a lot of different things. And I feel like this allows me to kind of just use the traits that exist within the archetype of a Pisces and apply it to Azuli, and now have this whole world around her. And if I create work, what I also do within my studio practice is I'll create work as if I'm performing these different characters. So when I'm performing the character of Azuli, it's a very intuitive and emotional place that I have to be within. And so I place myself in the world of Azuli, and I create through that. And there's no questioning of it. I'm just allowing my whole intuition to come out. Versus if I place myself in the world of Ansa, who's all about meditation, there's no thinking about what I'm doing. I'm just meditating. If I'm placing myself in the world of Olisior, which is all about philosophy, again, there's no thinking. I just know that it's all about questioning the unseen, which I find philosophy does so well. And so this has allowed me to re-enter my studio in a way where I feel a lot more, it's a lot less messy. And I think messy is a good thing, but eventually the chips fell and I found out, okay, this is how all these things are applying. And so these are paintings that I've been building that represent the different characters. And some of them are going to be figurative paintings, as these are. And some of them are going to be much more abstract and symbolic of the traits of the characters and what they mean in the story. And so this like movement between this chaos, but necessary chaos, to this clarity and world building of this whole other world that I would like to do. And also just allowing me to, sorry, I know we're supposed to go into QA, last few slides of me re-looking at the things that I have created, things that I overlooked, like the biosonification, which I enjoyed. And it's not like I didn't value it, but I just didn't know what I was doing with it. It felt like just another experiment. But now there's a whole story around this biosonification of, it's actually a love affair between two characters in the story, Soloro and Seda. Soloro is representative in this world as the sun, energy, vitality. Seda is Mother Earth and takes on the form of all sentience, so plants and animals. And so what I've been doing is creating a sort of symphosynthesis de Atsukazo, which is the world. Atsukazo is this world, and symphosynthesis of combining all these things to create a sort of symphony, like how to create a sonic experience around this life. And I love to create biosonification of plants because I think so much about plants and the lack of respect that they have in this world, of just the fact that because we can't see them move or speak in a way that we can understand, that we kind of relegate them as something that has no agency, but they're so impactful, and to give their activity a voice, their photosynthetic activity, which is also one of the original forms of quantum computing, of that quantumness, and convert it into sound, for me is so significant. And so, as I mentioned, I take on the roles of the different characters. Like Jitwa is all about balance and harmony. So I do a lot of Zen pebble stacking, which for me just feels like I'm embodying the form of Jitwa, which is all about like harmonizing energy. And really what all of this has become is studying consciousness. So there's a collective consciousness that I've been studying through mythology and rituals, and carrying the baton of amazing thinkers like Joseph Campbell, who has created the hero of the story of the myth, the power of the myth, and the hero's journey. And also Carl Jung, which has coined the term collective unconsciousness, who was a prolific psychoanalyst that studied the fact that groups all around the world, when they tell myths, they have very similar archetypes, even if they're not in direct communication. So there's something about our psyche that ties us all together. And then also the collective conscious, which I've been studying through forms of AI, and especially generative AI, of using language and finding the ways, all the metadata that surrounds these words, and how it influences what's created out of it. And Atsukazo kind of feels like this world between both, of what does it mean to understand the unconscious and the collective conscious, and what happens between that. And the way that I've actually been putting Atsukazo out into the world, even this past week, I was at University of Maryland, and what I did was collaborated with the dance department. So I had students and faculty. I told them the story of Atsukazo, the whole myth, and I created a 30-minute film that was projected on their huge screen. And so the performance became me creating a live composition. It was supposed to be a biosonification, but I didn't get to bring the plants in, but a live modular synthesis set. So I'm creating a composition that all the different parts of it tie to a different character. The dancers understand the different characters, and so they're embodying it through their movements, their dance movements, and then the screen is also telling the story. And so there's just like this really sensorial experience with visuals and sound and dance movement that told this story in a way that it wasn't even meant to be a literal or direct understanding, but it was very abstract. And I think for me, it's much more about texture and energy that I want to release into the world. At least in these versions of Telling Atsukazo. So that is really what I'm doing. And right now it's really about how to create a whole world for myself to exist within. And I'm sharing so much of this in talks and online and my social media and all that as a way to just show the process and the art of art. Like there's so many things about the way that we create as artists that we kind of throw away and we don't pay attention to the value of it. And I think the process is so important. I think sharing your process is really exciting. I love to see other people's processes. And so for me to share it online, I hope it can be a tool for other people. And I hope this talk can be a tool for you all of understanding that the things that I'm doing, anyone can do it and use it in a way that better understands themselves and society. And it can be really impactful to your art practice. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I think, yes, we should open it up to questions. I have a few questions, but I think, you know what? I'm gonna ask the first question. Thank you, Ari. This that study of the self, the output that you have with it, all the work that you're doing, as a I'm going to embody the personage of a parent of one of our students and students ask us as well, all this art and art making, how do I make money?
Yeah.
Right? Honestly, like, can you explain a little? I see that you have a studio, that your clothes are well fitted, you're traveling the world. So you're making money, but you're making art. Can you explain a little bit about, how some of your process of, turning this value, right, into coinage?
Yes. Thankful you asked that question because I would have had that question as a student too. I think for me, it's been a very long-term strategy. The way that I want to go back a decade ago of maybe even more than a decade ago of just being someone that has always been very money conscious and sensitive. And so the way that I've always been since first working in even before college was working a lot and hard and saving a lot. And so for me, what I've done, even when I've had full-time roles, I often have always had multiple full-time roles and was always like managing a bunch of different things so that I'm saving so much. And I have used that and set that aside so that in a moment like this, where I could finally take a step and pause and be very intentional about how I want to move forward. So now I'm using what I plan to do. I quit my full-time job, I think 8 months ago, and thought I was going to be using my savings to fund everything, my studio, my whole practice. But what ended up happening was once I started to place myself very intentionally in the world that I wanted to exist within and share the things that I was doing online and tapping people's shoulder and letting them know these are the things I'm thinking about. Sometimes I will set up a meeting with chairs of different university departments and say, hey, this is something I'm exploring. That's what happened with the University of Maryland. I went to University of Maryland as an undergrad and did studio art there. And then I reached out this past summer to the chair and said, hey, I just want to set up some time to let you know that these are things that I'm exploring and just to keep me in the back of your mind. Like, it's really about, there's both sharing the things that you're creating online so that any stranger, anyone can just know that you're doing what you're doing. And as someone who's been a curator and supported a lot of talent, that's the only way I know what people are doing and I'm able to support them. So I know that as a talent, I need to do that too, make it easier for people to find the things I'm doing. But it's also, don't just speak into the microphone into this group of people that have a whole bunch of people speaking to them, speak very intentionally to specific people that can help you have one-on-ones with them. And that's something I've done. So it's been a combination of hustling, like working many jobs at one time and balance yourself and have a form of self-care, but also be really aggressive and understand long-term that the financial, for me, it's very much to have a financial cushion. And then also just, and then also the way that I'm doing, I haven't even sold any art. I haven't actually sold real art that I've created out of the studio, because it's also, again, an investment. And the way that I'm funding myself now is more of doing a lot of talks. I've given a lot of keynotes, and I have a lot of keynotes lined up in the fall of sharing the research side. And I think that's the way that I want to exist right now. I don't really like to bring money into my art because I don't want it to be influenced by money. And I think that can take my art into different trajectories. And I will naturally try to fit it in a way where someone would want to buy it. But instead, it's let me protect the art. And I'm actually okay with selling the research in forms of things like this, like doing talks or consulting with different people. Like that's been more of the exchange, and the research is supporting the art. It's how I'm creating the art, but it's not deciding the way that I create. And so it's finding that flow for you. Oh, you're muted.
Hey, Marquise.
Yeah, now you're back.
Marquise was just going to ask a question via the chat, I believe.
Okay, all right, that's okay. Can you go ahead and ask that question then, Marquise? While you're doing that, Marquise, let's go to Ree. Oh, okay, I see it. So really deep. My question is about the part where you were talking about using ego as the stage and cutting off outside influence, so that you can focus on cultivating yourself. I think, do you want Ari to speak a little bit more on that aspect, Marquise? I think, yes. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Like, what was the process of doing that? What did you learn?
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the other part being, I think it's necessary to be ignorant of outside things to be able to realize your own truth. I wouldn't, so the way that I explored my ego, much of trying to not know what's happening in the world. It's more of trying to become as well acquainted within my own world. I think tactics that I did were, as I mentioned, of just like, I think being online is an important thing to be reflective of how it's influencing us. Like the way that we kind of cookie cut ourselves to fit into social media, or the parts of ourselves that we keep and don't keep, or really all of it is just a performance. And so I think to think about that, but then also to see how other people are moving and understand, as we see how our friends are operating on the space, that's going to influence us, and that's going to tell us what's okay and what's not okay. And for me, it's just like, that stuff gets exhausting. I don't know for y'all, but like social media gets really exhausting. And I just want to be myself, and I don't want to take myself so seriously and just, play and have fun. So I think for me, there was that element. There was also being social and out at events. It's nice. Like, we're social creatures. We need to be around people. But I also think I'm such a, like, I just want to be a hermit. Like, I really just want to be a monk alone in my own world. And I think it was really designing, how do I do that, but also create space where I can have one-on-one dinners with friends that I want to talk to, and not have to go to a whole event where I casually talk to these different people. Like for me, I understand I don't really like small talk. Like a lot of us, we understand that we don't want to just talk about the weather. We want to like talk about emotions and feelings. And so I can do that easier when I have a one-on-one conversation with people. I can like get deeper into what I actually want to do, the meat of a conversation. So it was strategies like that, like understand, how do I want to interact with the world? How am I being reflective of the way that the world is impacting me? and create a large space to just understand. I know it's really hard to do it as a student because you have to go to your classes, but with any moment that you have moments where you can decide this is how I'm going to use my time, I think it's really important to take that space to just think about the way that you're thinking, feeling, like all of that, like really give an awareness. I think for me, the biggest thing that I've been trying to do is have such a high level of awareness, and it could be a form of overthinking, which is not always good, but I think there is something good about thinking so much about the way that you are, so you can decide if you want to continue doing that or not. If you have an emotional trigger on something, understand that there's a whole story around that emotion that you have. So if you become aware of that story, then you can now decide how you're going to let that emotion impact you. It's really just a level of self-awareness that I was trying to do.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have two questions. One is in the chat, but let's go with Ree. Is it Ree? Am I pronouncing that right?
Actually, it's pronounced Ray.
Ray, I'm so sorry.
That was really weird. Oh, no worries. That's totally fine. So I'm also I was when I did undergrad in college, I was pre-med, and I was always focused on like that as being my career. And I actually started doing art only as a means to better understand myself. Like all the paintings I painted in the past like year and a half, which is like I think maybe like 30 above, a little bit above 30, have been self-portraits. I was just wondering how you think it's best to go about, and I guess the proper way to phrase this, the best way to go about gaining interest in your work when it's only like stuff that is focused on yourself, you know, because we really live in a world where people are more focused on, you know, things that they can relate to. And I guess if people could relate to how I portray myself, that would be good. But like, what is your advice for, I guess, growing that impact that you can have on other people when only focusing on yourself or something that is, I guess, built from yourself, which I don't know. I feel like that built from yourself statement breaks apart my whole question, because I think all art is built from the self of the artist. So, but you know, in generally speaking.
Yeah. Also with the pronunciation, my name is pronounced Adi. The R is like a D. I didn't correct earlier, but yeah, I think that like kind of alludes to the thing I was talking to Ayo about earlier of you were saying how to get people to kind of care essentially about the work that you're creating as an artist. And I think that's why I protect the work that I create so much from money, because that's really the only reason why you would care if someone cares about your work, is if you are, one of the major reasons is if you're getting money for it, like there's a way to sustain it. And so for me, it's understanding, okay, if I care about whether people care about the work, then that's going to shift the way that I'm creating. And so it's more of how do I create something that is valuable to society, but is also valuable to myself. And so that's the research practice. And so they just feed each other. And so with the research practice, there is a lot of self-analyzation, but also I understand that when you study yourself, it reveals so many things about society. Like it's never about just you as an individual. You really are a microcosm of the entire world. So there's that aspect of me understanding, okay, the things that I'm learning about myself could very well be impactful to other people in how they understand the way that they're operating, but also within my research of it being so much about myth and society and forms of logic and even AI, like all of those are completely outside of myself. And so it's me just studying society in a way where I can understand where do I fit in with it, agree with, and kind of just like putting a lens to everything. So I think with my art practice, there's also understanding, there's a third part of it, which is I think we often think of investment as like a very directional, like a linearly directional thing. And I understand that this art residency is not a linear directional thing of I'm creating a residency so that I can create a bunch of paintings that I can make a bunch of money off of. Instead, it's I'm creating a residency to study so many different things. And even if I don't leave the residency with the final product, there's so many things, techniques, strategies, ways of understanding the world that I now have. And I can use that in so many other places. Like it's really the power of creativity. And I was even talking to Ayo about this earlier. It's never about the medium. It's about the fact that you're being creative and you're flexing that muscle and the neuroplasticity of rewiring your brain to think differently and using all these different strategies that could be used in so many different ways. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, thank you. So I think we have time for one more question. So Studio 520, maybe you could put it in the chat, and then maybe we could get Artie could answer that offline. So we have Amina. Amina, are you still online? Do you want to speak your question? Okay, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I can do that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I also kind of have a similar line of work in the sense of I also am very passionate about creating a reality that doesn't actually exist in what we perceive to be the physical world. So, you know, it's interesting for me to hear you build this almost like, you know, unique reality that, you know, it basically is a translation of you, right? So what I really want to ask is, you know, as an artist, what are some essential components that you believe this reality, or for other artists that are maybe trying to build their own reality, right? What are some necessary components that you would say are needed in the craft in order for it to be successful, aside from self-discovery, because that is almost like the initial framework?
You said draft. What was that word? What are some things that you need in the?
Yeah, to create this, you know, reality, just to have necessary points that from which you build on, right?
So the question is, what are things that you need to? Okay, can you say that? I'm getting lost in that question.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so aside from self-discovery, what are necessary points that the artist must include in their unique reality when creating their own, right?
Okay. Aside from self-discovery, I would say it's hard to answer that question. I think for me, it's kind of just like it's a natural way of being, and it's like it's like saying, how do you breathe? For me, I don't know. It's like I think it's you just. I also am realizing there's so many things about the way that I operate, which is something that all of us are doing, which we have never even put a language to, so we're not even aware of it, but it guides the way that we are. So I think for me, it's just been, this is just who I am. I don't know how to like explain in a way where I can give a formula for someone else. And I think that's where other people could use something like this to create a language for what it is that they're doing, because we're all doing this. Like we all are doing things where we don't have a language to it. So I think it all just comes down to just curiosity. And I think curiosity, follow your curiosity, whatever things that you're interested in as you're building this world, and a curiosity that then leads to awareness, that then leads to intentionality. So you may be curious about creating this space, becoming aware of why you want to create that space, then leads to the intentionality of these are the steps that you need to take to create the way that people can experience that space. I think there's a form of self-discovery of just like really, which is also the awareness part of like really honing in and understanding this is who I am. I think it's also, again, as I mentioned, like I asking money, like that's a really big thing. That's how I've been able to do this in a very comfortable way, because I had so many years where I was not comfortable within my own art practice and not able to put time and energy into it because I'm working all these different jobs. And so I think there's also just like this level of sacrifice and long-term vision of saying, okay, I'm going to do all these things now that may not feel like it's directly influencing my work, but it's creating a space, a way for me to do the work in the way that I want to do. So I think it's also just like a lot of long-term planning and foresight of how do I design my life right now to be the life that I really want it to be. I hope that answered. I'll read this. I don't mind going going further. If you.
I think. Okay, maybe we take one because we're over now and we have I have some closing remarks. So maybe we just take one last question. Lorraine, can you ask your question?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, hi. So I just was wondering, just wanting to hear more about your personal experiences, in terms of like spirituality, and humanity, and how you've been able to like explore those topics more for yourself. It's very evident, the embodiment of it in your work, but just wanting to hear a little bit of like some of that personal experience with it.
Yeah, spirituality is, I think that also has been something that I've been studying for a long time, different forms of it. And I think spirituality also takes very different things. Like I was just talking to someone else yesterday we were talking about the ways that spirituality has influenced my work. And sometimes spirituality, for one, I equate spirituality to feeling, like it's about not being cognizant in a way where it's a rationalization with intellectual use, like tools, but it's more of a feeling of the world and the energy within the world. And that can be experienced even through music. Like I was talking about my love for Afrobeats. Like as someone who just appreciates music in general, I feel like where Afrobeats is right now is just such an amazing synthesis of every form of Black cultural music that has ever existed, from reggae to blues to jazz to hip hop. Like it's all of that. And it's like Blackness that has left the continent, gone to a different continent, and is now being observed back from on the continent. Like it's just like this amazing thing, but it's also understanding the spiritual practices of instrumentation and like the way that we've used drums. Cultures all around the world have used drums to tap into the psyche, the subconscious, like the spiritual elements of instruments. So it's like for me, it's very much like an exploration of spirit in a artistic and sensual way, but then there's also the study of different spiritualities. Like I've been very influenced by Eastern practices, especially things like the Tao Te Ching. I've studied that for years and so many different translations and trying to get to the essence of what it all means. And I feel like I've finally gotten to a space where I understand what it's doing and can read it in a way that I've never been able to read it before, and even understanding Buddhism and but also finding things that I like about them and don't like about them. And when I first started studying them, I try to embody them so strictly because I really wanted to figure it out and apply it to my life. And it felt some parts really aligned with me, but other parts didn't. And I think as anyone navigates spirituality, it's really important to understand these are dogmas, which are symbols from people of different times and different geographies and different worlds. And so there are some things that are going to resonate with you in this world, but that doesn't mean that everything is going to be applicable to how you have to operate here. And so things like the Tao Te Ching very much preaches not being assertive and not being powerful, or like really reshaping the practice of being powerful in a way where now I understand, okay, in many ways it caused tension of me being a creative and trying to sustain myself as being a creative, of like, how can I be a creative and not assert myself? How can I, not share the things that I'm doing, trying to do it in a Taoist way, but then finding it's not working. So I had to re-understand the way that I can use some parts of it to help me, but also throw out the things that don't apply to me. Or even with Buddhism is so central on understanding the fact that suffering comes from clinging and desiring. And so I tried to not desire and cling, but then I realized that's just me numbing sensations, very natural human sensations. I'm going to desire things. So with this whole practice of re-sculpting my consciousness, it's understanding things like psychitecture, like the way that we design our psyche of, I don't have to remove the form of desire. I can instead just remap my brain to have a different association to the failures of desire. Like maybe I want this thing, and when you have a desire, you can want it and you don't have it, or you have it and you're fearing of losing it. All of that is desire. But if I take a step outside of that and redesign my relationship to that whole relationship and say, you know what, if I get it and I have it, that's great. I'm not going to be attached to it. If I don't get it, that's great. I'm not going to be attached to it. Like everything is in my life the way that it's supposed to be, and really just like releasing these attachments to things. So a lot of it is, so much of the myth that I've been building is rooted in emotions, because I think that is the essence of everything. I think we really need to understand the way that our emotions are impacting us, but also understand that it's not just about the emotions, it's about the rationalization of our emotions, the whole world around our emotions, and that all of that infiltrates to consciousness. So I think that got to your question, but yeah, that's how I've been exploring spirituality and feelings and all that.
Thank you so much. We have one more question, but I'm going to put that in the document, and maybe we could answer that later for that individual. I just wanted to, I'm going to put in the chat that Artie is giving a talk. Oh, you're in a panel, you moderated a panel, and you're giving a keynote at Tomi. Is it Tomi? Let me
Tomorrow.
two more. Yes. So the link is there. And then also we have coming up, I'm just going to put this in the chat because this makes it a lot easier. Oh, wait, I'm putting it, hold on. It always gets me all the time when it says direct message. This should go to everyone.
And as you say that, Ayo had a question on trauma that I can answer while you put those in the chat.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I can't speak exactly to trauma in a way that's well informed by all the studies, but I think trauma also goes back to emotions and the way that we tell. So much of what I'm studying is the stories that society is telling, that we're telling ourselves, like all of that. So I think when I mentioned earlier, of like you may have emotions, and then you can have emotions triggered based off all the associations that you've had with that emotion. And so I think trauma can often be your emotions being placed within these ways that you have. And to be very specific, maybe if you are dating someone and they don't text you back within the first 2 hours, like I see this stuff on Instagram all the time of, oh, they didn't text me back, like, there's now drama coming from that. And I think that can be a form of an abandonment issue. Like you associate someone not paying immediate attention to you with abandonment because you've experienced abandonment very early in your life. And now so like all the ways that you experience an emotion, but if you like really analyze that emotion, if you need to have that emotion in that situation, oftentimes you'll find these are all the things that have impacted me to make me feel this way because of this situation. So I think trauma is a part of that. Trauma is really down to stories that we have told ourselves, the emotions, and the stories that even genetically we exist within us from generations, epigenetics, but essentially just the narrative that we have and how we can, what I'm trying to explore is how we can use our like neuroplasticity to have a different relationship.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I just wanted to wrap up, say thank you to everybody here, and also let you all know that we have another talk coming up. Here we go, Kyoto Handcraft Skills, Expressive Technology. That's October 4th, 5:45 to 6:45. And we'll have Dr. Satoshi Nakamaru joining us from Tokyo and talking about research and development of Zuzu Next. So I'll put that information in here again. Artie, thank you so much. It was great catching up with you. And again, my, Afrotectopia shirt. Yes. All right. Thank you all so much, and look forward to seeing you all at the next Cloud Salon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.